Hey everyone, welcome to part 58 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll look at how to create different types of items like Pokeballs and TMs and all. And we'll show the items in the inventory like this based on the category. So I can switch the category by using left and right arrow keys, just like in Pokemon games. So let's look at how to implement this. Special thanks to all my Patreons for making this series possible. By becoming a Patreon, you can support me and get access to the complete project files of the series. The project files also contain some advanced features that are not covered on YouTube. So let's start the video. So right now, all our items are recovery items, right? So we have a script called recovery item that inherits from the item base. So next we want to create other types of items like Pokeballs and TMs and HMs and all that. So for different types of items, we can create a separate class like this and inherit from the item base class. So let's create a class for the Pokeball items just like this. So I'll go to my scripts folder and under inventory, I'll create a new script called Pokeball item. Okay. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, I've switched to dark theme in Visual Studio. A lot of you have been asking for this, but I didn't switch because I've been using the light theme for so long and it kind of feels weird to use the dark theme. But now I'm slowly getting used to it. Okay, so let's get back to implementing Pokeball item. So we don't need all this code. I'm just going to remove it. And this class is going to inherit from the item base. Okay, and I'm going to override the use item function of the item base class. And for now, I'm just going to return true. We'll do the implementation of the Pokeballs later. But first, let's create the Pokeballs and show them in the inventory UI. So to create them as an asset in Unity, we have to add the create asset menu attribute, just like we did for the recovery item. So let me just copy that and put it on top of my Pokeball item class. And I'll just change this text to create new Pokeball. Okay, so let's go to Unity and create some Pokeballs. So under game, under resources and items, this is where we put all our items. So what I'll do is, to organize things better, I'll put separate types of items in separate folder. So here I'll create a folder called recovery items and I'll put all these items in it. Okay, so next for the Pokeball items, I'll create another folder called Pokeball items. So this is where we'll create all types of Pokeballs. So first let's create a normal Pokeball. So if you go to create items and create new Pokeball, this will create a Pokeball item for us. So I'll just name this Pokeball and also change the name over here. So this is going to be the normal Pokeball. So let me give it some description and I'll choose a sprite for it. So we have the sprite sheet with lots of Pokeballs that we imported while implementing the Pokemon capturing mechanic. So for this Pokeball, I'll just choose a normal Pokeball and then I'll duplicate this and create a great ball. All right. Let me also change the name over here. And for the description, I'll say something like a ball with a higher capture rate than Pokeball. All right. And let me choose an icon for it. So I'll choose this one. Okay, so now we have two types of Pokeball items. So next, how can we add this to the inventory? So if you go to the inventory class, here we have a list of item slots to hold the items. But should we add it to this list? In Pokemon games, different types of items are shown in separate list, right? So we'll create a separate list for each type of item. So let me just duplicate this and create Pokeball slots. And we can also duplicate this to create something like TM slots. So now we have slots for 3 types of items. So next let's assign items to these new slots. So I'll go to the player's inventory. All right. And in here, you should see the new slots that we just created. So to the Pokeball slots, I'll add 2 items. And let me add the Pokeball and Great Ball in here. Okay. And I'll just assign some random counts for it. So now we also have Pokeballs in our inventory. So next we need a way of showing multiple slots in our inventory UI. So I'll open the inventory UI, and when you make changes, be sure to go inside the prefab and make changes from there so that the change will be reflected in all the places in which we are using the inventory UI prefab. In our case, we have 2 places in the battle system and in the UI canvas. So you have to make sure to go inside the prefab when you make any edit. So here, when you go inside the prefab, you can see this weird issue. So this is because when you go inside a UI prefab, it's not parented to any canvas, right? So here, the inventory UI is parented to this UI canvas, and in the case of battle system, it is parented to the battle canvas. But when you go inside the prefab, we don't have those canvases as parent. So Unity just creates this canvas environment as the parent. So here you can see the size is actually 640 by 480. But if you look at our UI canvas or even the battle canvas, the size will be 800 by 600. Okay, so this is because we are setting it from the canvas scaler. So we can set the size for normal canvases, but inside the prefab, we have no way of setting the size of this canvas that's added by Unity. So what size is Unity using over here? By default, Unity just uses some random size. I don't know how it chooses the size, but the good thing is we can change the size by changing the resolution from our game tab. So here you can see when I switch to the game tab, the size of the canvas changed and the size is now 1024 by 768, which is the standalone size. So in our case, all our canvases are 800 by 600. So we also want to edit the prefabs with that size. So for that, all we have to do is set the resolution of the game to 800 by 600. So by default, we don't have such a resolution. I have this because I have added this before in other projects, and you can easily add this by pressing this button. Just give it a name and a width and height. Okay, but I already have one with 800 by 600, so I'm going to choose that. So now our canvas should be 800 by 600. So now let's start editing our inventory UI. So we need a text to show the type of item. So I'll duplicate this description text and let me put it on top of everything. And I'll rename this to item category since it shows the category of the item. So let me just change its anchor to top left and I'll place it somewhere over here. Let me just change the text to something like items and I'll make the size of the text smaller. Next, let me align the text to the center, both horizontally and vertically. All right, that looks better. So let me just rearrange everything. So next, I'll add two arrows on the right and left of the category text. So we can use the same arrow that we used for the list. So I'll just duplicate this up arrow and name it left arrow. All right, let me just enable it. And I'll just parent it to the item category text. And I'll bring this over here. I'll just set the X to something like minus 120. And we need to rotate it by 90 degrees. So next let's duplicate this to create the right arrow. So for this, I'll use plus 120 for the X and minus 90 for the rotation. Just the opposite of left arrow. That looks fine. Let me just leave a bit more space so that we can put bigger text there. So I'll just change it to 140. And let me just adjust the position a bit. All right. So next, let's write the code to handle the selection of item categories. So I'll go to Visual Studio, and in the inventory UI, this is where we want to write the code for category selection. So first we need to get a reference to the item category text that we created. So I'm just going to copy this variable and just rename it to item category. Or let me just name it something like category text. So next let's write the code for category selection. So in here, along with the selected item, I'll also create another variable called selected category. Okay. And we want to change that when the user presses the right and left arrow keys. Okay. So here in the handle update, I'll add another else if condition and I'll check for right arrow first. And if right arrow is pressed, then we want to increment the selected category, right? And else if the left arrow is pressed, then we want to decrement it. Okay. So next, we need to clamp the selected category just like we clamp the selected item. So I'll just duplicate this and change selected item to selected category. So for category, instead of using inventory slots.count, we should use 3, right? Since we have 3 category of items in our inventory. So of course, I don't want to hard code this. Instead, we want to get the count like this. But right now, we don't have any list for that in the inventory. So I'll create a new list for that here. So since we only have fixed number of categories, we can make this list static. Okay. And I'll call this list item categories. Let me make this a property since that's a good practice. So currently we have 3 categories, right? So I'll add the names of those categories to this list. So the first one is going to be items, which will be the normal items. And the second one is going to be Pokeballs. And the third one is going to be TMs and HMs. So now we can get the count from this list, and we can also use the name here to show it in the category text. All right, so let's go back to inventory UI, and in here, instead of hard coding 3, I'll use inventory dot item categories dot count. All right, so now we are handling the category selection. So next, when the selection changes, we should update the slot list in the UI, right? So just like we do for the selected item, I'll store the previous category in a variable. Okay, and here, if the previous category is not equal to the selected category, then we need to update the item list in the UI. So we already have a function for that called update item list. So let's call that from here. So when this update item list is called, it should show the items in the currently selected category, right? But right now we are simply using inventory.slots, which is the normal category, but we should use one of these three lists based on the selected category, right? So what I'll do is I'll create a function that will return one of these three lists based on the selected category. So here I'll create a function called get slots by category, and this function will return a list of item slot. Okay, and it'll take the selected category as the input. Okay. Oh, I didn't close this bracket. All right. So this function should return one of these three lists based on the category index, right? So for that, I'll create another list to store all the slots that we have. So this list is going to be a list of item slot. All right. So that's because inside this list, we want to store a list of item slots, right? So this is going to be list of item slot, and I'll just call it something like all slots. Okay. So let me just initialize this from the awake. So in here, I'll assign all the three lists to this list. Okay. So now inside this function, we can simply return all slots of category index. And this will return the slots based on the category. So now we should use this function anytime we want to get the slots, and we should not use this property. So I'm going to remove this property so that all the places that uses this property will have an error, and it'll be easy for us to chain them. So we have 3 or 4 places in the inventory UI where the slots is used. So let's chain them one by one. So instead of using slots, I'll call get slots by category, and I'll pass the selected category as the parameter. Okay. So let me also change it here. All right. And finally, in the update item selection function, we have 2 places where this is used. So to keep the code short, I'll cache the slots in another variable. Okay. I'll cache it like this. And here we can simply use slots.count. And we can also change it over here. So now we'll show different items in the UI based on the category that is selected. And when we change the selection, we are calling the update item list. That will update the list with the items of the newly selected category. So what else should we do when the selected category changes? We have to change the name in the category text, right? So I'll say category text dot text equals. So how can we get the name of the selected category? We can get that from the item categories list, right? So I'll use that here and I'll pass the selected category to get the name. And in here, I'll also set the selected item to 0. Since we are showing a new list of items, the selection should start from 0, right? So next I'll put this code inside the else if. So I'll bring this here and make it else if. So the reason why I made this else if is because both the selected category and selected item can't change in the same frame. Okay, so now let's go to Unity and test this. So before we test, we need to assign the item category text in the inventory UI script. So let me do that. And let's test now. So right now, the game window is a bit small since we changed its resolution to 800 by 600 for making the UI. So let me change it back to standalone so that it's a bit more bigger. Okay, so now let's open the bag. So the item category is shown over here and we can select different items as usual. And if I press the right arrow, it'll change the category to Pokeballs and it'll only show the Pokeball items in the list. Okay, so if I press left key, it'll go back to items, and if I press right, it'll go to Pokeballs. All right, so that works fine. Things like the icon and description is automatically changed when we change the category. But we have one problem here. This down arrow shouldn't be visible for Pokeball since we only have 2 items, right? So when we change the category, we have to make sure to reset things like this. Okay. And another issue is if I press right again from here and go to TMs and HMs, you can see we have an exception here. So this is because TMs and HMs doesn't have any items in it. Right now it's empty. So that's another issue we need to fix. So first, let's reset things like down arrow and the icon and the description when the category changes. So let's go to Visual Studio, and when the selected category changes, we should also reset things like the arrow sprites and icon and description. Okay, so to reset the arrow images, we just have to make them inactive. So we can do that from here, but I'll actually create a separate function to keep things clean. So I'll create a new function called reset selection. So in this function, we can reset everything. So the first thing to reset is the selected item variable, right? So let's cut this from here and move to the function, and let's call the function from here. Okay, and inside the function, I'll paste this. So first we are resetting the selected item variable. So next we need to deactivate the up and down arrow sprites, right? So I'll say up arrow dot game object dot set active false, and I'll also do the same for the down arrow. All right. So next we need to reset the icon and the description of the sprite. So for the icon, I'll say item icon dot sprite equal to null. This will reset its sprite, and then I'll reset the description also. Okay. So this will reset everything for us. So let's go ahead and test this. All right. So yeah, now you can see when I go to Pokeballs, the up and down arrows are no longer shown, but it's shown correctly when we come to items. Okay, so that's fixed. So next, let's fix this issue. So when we go to TMs and HMs, it's throwing this argument out of range exception. So if we click on this error, it'll show us a line that's causing the issue. So let me click on this to go to that line. So this is the line that's causing the issue. So here you can see in the update item selection, we are trying to set the sprite and text using the item in the selected item slot, right? But in the case of TMs and HMs category, we don't have any items in it. So this line will throw an argument out of bound exception. So we can easily fix this by using a simple if condition. So I'll simply check if slots dot count greater than 0, and only then I'll execute these three lines. All right, so that should fix this error for us. So let's go ahead and test. Okay. So yeah, now we can go to TMs and HMs and it's not throwing any errors. So this UI looks weird when we don't have any items, but if you have a good background, like the one used in Pokemon games, this will look okay even when you don't have any items. All right, so now we can switch between categories and we can select different items from each. So before we end the video, let me show you one more trick. So right now, items is the first category and teams is the last category, right? We can't go beyond it and we can't go below the items also. So that's because we are clamping the selected category here. But one thing you can do is instead of clamping the category, you can rotate between them. So if I press right from TMs and HMs, it should take me to the items. So from the last category, it should take us to the first category. And if you try to go left from the first category, it should take us to the last category. So we can implement that very easily. Instead of clamping the category like this, we can simply use an if else to rotate the category selection. And by the way, whether you are clamping or rotating the selection, you should always do it before you clamp the selected item. All right. The reason is because if you don't clamp it before this, then the selected category might go above its limits. Okay, so make sure to do it before clamping the items. So for rotating the selection, I'll check if selected category is greater than the last index. So what's the last index? It's inventory dot categories dot count minus 1, right? The same thing that we use for clamping. So if it's greater than the last index, then we can set it to 0, which is the first index, right? And if it's lesser than 0, then we can set it to the last index, just the opposite. Okay, so here I'll check if selected category is less than 0, and in that case I'll set it to the last index, which is the count minus 1. So this will rotate the selection instead of just clamping it. So let's go ahead and test that. Okay, so yeah, now if I press right from TM and HMs, it'll go back to the items. And from here, if I press left, it'll go back to the last category. All right. So this is how you rotate the selection instead of clamping it. So I'll stop the video here. And in the next video, we'll implement the code for using the Pokeball. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Before you leave, make sure to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to my channel. That'll really help me out. Alright, so I'll see you in the next video.